Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Off the Dome Sports Podcast, your favorite sports podcast where two and sometimes three sports lovers sit and give their hot takes.
Off the Dome.
I am Redfish.
I'm Rebo Hustle.
And I'm Mustang.
And we will be steering this ship today. Boys, how we doing?
Outstanding.
Charlie, good show.
It's been a while since we've done a full podcast. We've been doing a lot of shorter videos like mock drafts and season previews, playoff predictions, stuff like that. So, glad to be back in the full podcast format. We'll be covering a lot of stuff today, so we're going to move through it pretty fast. That way we can get all the information out there that we want to talk about and get to cover all our favorite Louisiana sports. I mean, we got a new background here. I think it matches our brand and what we want to do. Look a little bit more professional than usual. As you can see, Off the Dome, make sure to follow us on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe on every video. Watch every single one. They're all great content. Also, check out The Know. That's K-N-E-A-U-X. The only way to spell it. Make sure to check out Be in the Know on the X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, as well as the website where articles are being written every day about your favorite Louisiana sports. As you can see, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints to start. 2024 draft wrapped up last week. And, we're going to talk about each pick individually and go over it a little bit. But I think as a whole, I'll start off by saying I think the Saints did a fantastic job. I think they had one of the best drafts we've had personally since 2017, where we took 5 really good players. 2 rookies of the year, 1 stalwart of the offensive line, and then Trey Hendrickson, who ended up playing really good for us, went to Cincinnati, and now is looking for his way out of there. We took a bunch of good players, so I think this was probably our best draft since then. I'm really excited about what we did. And then we can break down the picks a little bit further.
Yeah, the thing that shocked me the most is the ability to find the diamonds in the rough and sticking and picking in the late rounds, which honestly are some of my favorite picks this year.
Yeah, there was definitely some things that they did, especially that Green Bay trade that I at first thought was questionable, but seeing how we came out of that, I think that we won.
Yeah, I think we did a really good job, and let's get into the individual picks here. Starting off, pick 14, a place where a lot of people either had us sticking and picking, getting an offensive tackle, or even moving up for one. And we get a guy who was very popular among the mock drafts in Talise Fuaga. There is a little bit of debate about how his name is said, but that's the way we're going to say it today because it's the way it reads the best. So Talise Fuaga, pick 14. Rebo Hustle, you are our resident offensive lineman, so why don't you give us a breakdown about what Fuaga does?
Yeah, Fuaga's, in my opinion, the best run blocker in this draft. He really gets after it, stays square, doesn't ever play nose over toes. He's really a raw pass blocking tackle, which he showed well at the Senior Bowl, what he could do at the NFL level against highly talented defensive linemen. But all in all, he was the best tackle left on the board when the Saints came up at 14. We couldn't make anything happen. There was talks that we were moving up. Some people say it was for Michael Penix. I think it was for a offensive lineman, and you just couldn't get a deal done. So you stick and pick, get the best player available, and that's Talise Fuaga.
Yeah. I would definitely thought and liked that the Saints went with offensive line with their first-round pick, especially with, everything with Ramczyk. And just the injuries we've battled on the offensive line throughout the past few seasons. I think getting a guy like this who can play right or left tackle really secures a nice foundation moving forward for this team, and frees up a lot of opportunities for him on this O-line.
Yeah, he was fantastic in the post-college season, pre-NFL season workouts. I mean, he did great at the Combine. He did great at his pro day. Killed the Senior Bowl. So he kind of was one of those guys where people knew he was going to go high, but really cemented himself as a first rounder with all of that postseason hype. And he's just a really, really good player. I think, like Rebo Hustle said, run blocking wise, he is a nasty run blocker. Like, he is going to move you off the line of scrimmage. He's not a guy who's just going to hold his own. He is going to be the cement of your run blocking scheme. We had talked about, the versatility where he can play right. He can play right tackle. He may be able to kick over to left. We've never seen him there, but you never know what can happen. But he can also play inside because he does have such a good run blocking prowess. If there was any question, it would be, the pass blocking. He's a good pass blocker, but he wasn't necessarily the best one in the draft. So if there were a question, I think that would be it. But if you look at the depth of position here, Trevor Penning, Nick Saldiveri, Landon Young, Oli Udoh, those are the guys he really has to play up against. I think he is a plug-and-play right tackle with Ramczak's health being questionable, and if Ramczak can be healthy, you move him over to left, and you have all four of those guys competing for the left guard job.
Yeah, definitely like the pick here. I really think we got our best fit available. That was, the way the cards fell. I like the way it worked out.
Yeah. If we base it off of everybody in the draft, I'd give this pick maybe an A-, but considering who was on the board and who's available and where we were picking at, A+ pick by the Saints there. Then we had that trade that you mentioned earlier. We move up from 45 to 41, giving up 168 and 190, which, in the grand scheme of things really didn't matter too much because we had 3 fifth-rounders, a 6th-rounder, and a 7th-rounder. So it's not like we were hurting in draft stock. So, we move up 4 picks while giving up 2 very late picks to get a guy you two have been loving all along in Kool-Aid McKinstry, Mustang. Talk about Kool-Aid.
Well, like we've stated before, his draft stock kind of dropped because of the amazing season his teammate had, Terrion Arnold. But like we talked about before, Terrion Arnold's success, that is, really came because of how locked down Kool-Aid McKinstry was this past season and the season before, to where quarterbacks didn't even want to test him. I really like having an over-athletic guy at the position like we have here, someone who could just lock down your number one, like people are saying about Cooper DeJean. I don't know if y'all seen that, but that's awesome.
Oh, I sent it to you on TikTok.
Did you?
Don't you worry.
Yeah. But yeah, I really like the pick. I was definitely a little skeptical when we traded up 3 draft picks to move up only 4 spots. But I really like the way it played out. I have high hopes for this defense with the addition of Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yeah, and he's by far the best press man corner in this draft. I mean, Terrion Arnold was playing a lot of off-ball, a lot of off coverage, and Quinyon Mitchell was known as a pass breakup kind of guy. But in 2022, Kool-Aid McKinstry had one of the best seasons from a cornerback in recent memory, and that played into him not being tested very much in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, before the season, Kool-Aid was a top 10, top 15 draft prospect. Dropped off a little bit because of the drop in production, but like you guys point out, that could be due to the fact that quarterbacks weren't thrown his way anymore. I mean, we looked at the numbers before the podcast started. It looked like Terrion Arnold got tested twice as much as Kool-Aid did. 79 targets against Terrion Arnold were only 39 against Kool-Aid. Although he didn't have the interceptions that Terrion had, it's because he got targeted 40 less times. So, Kool-Aid was somebody I was kind of, no pun intended, cool on. Before I really started hearing you guys and watching the film and paying attention to more than just box scores. But by the end of the draft process, I had him at cornerback 3. So to get the 3rd best cornerback in the 2nd round, for somebody who has proven that they can play the position at a high level against elite talent, that's really hard to pass up. So trading up 4 spots to get him, great move by Mickey Loomis, I think, in my opinion. As you can see, depth of position, obviously Marshawn Lattimore's there, but he is somebody who's now on the trade block, somebody who we could consider moving, which would automatically move guys like Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo into a bigger light. I think there's a very versatile way you can use all 4 of those DBs. You can imagine them in almost any set, and it makes sense. 4 young, really good corners at the position, so I'm really excited to see what we do. Again, considering who was on the board, what we did, and what we did to move up, A+ pick by the Saints here.
Yeah, I agree. And, kind of going off what you said about, having this depth at this position, me and Rebo talked earlier about, how it possibly could look if we do keep Marshawn Lattimore for the years coming. I don't see why Alontae Taylor couldn't slide to safety. He's played there before at Tennessee, and he's played it pretty good. I know I was big on him coming out of the draft because he was versatile like that. He could play both positions. I could see him either way. It does kind of scare me because I know how good he's been at corner. He's always going to the ball, regardless of whether it's on his side of the field or not. He's getting his nose in every tackle, and I think that at safety he could do even better.
Yeah, Taylor's a great coverage guy, so it's hard to think, hey, we're going to drop him back to safety and let him play the field. But like you mentioned, he is so physical and so good in the run game, you can obviously see him switching over to safety and making it work. The biggest question mark here for me is what do we do with the Debo? He's in a contract year, so this is kind of like a make it or break it type year for him, and it's hard to think that he's going to be able to show off that amount of ability when Kool-Aid's coming in trying to take a spot. Moving on from the Kool-Aid to somebody who is a very, what's the word for it? Controversial pick. Spencer Rattler. Now, obviously, you can see we had over 100 picks in between the last pick and this one. We sat back. We let the board fall how it may. Didn't move up, didn't move down, stuck in pick with what we had, and we decided to address the quarterback position. Spencer Rattler, 4-year starter, played 2 years at Oklahoma, ended up getting benched for Caleb Williams, goes into South Carolina, and just kind of takes over that team. Doesn't necessarily do anything super flashy and become this Joe Burrow level quarterback, but he definitely wasn't the worst quarterback we've ever seen, and he held his own in the SEC, which I think is really important. For me, what really impressed me out of Spencer Rattler is his growth and development, not only as a quarterback, but as a person. He went from this guy people were looking at on the Netflix show QB1 as this like punk kid who didn't care about anything other than himself to somebody who's wearing a C on his chest. And for me, that's really important, not only as a player on the field, but what you're going to bring in the locker room. As far as on the field goes, short to intermediate accuracy is where he finds his game at. He really excelled in that 8 to 12 yard range, which is something we've seen from the Saints offense work really well. When you can hit those first down catches, and you could do it with high accuracy, that's something that Spencer Rattler did at 70% completion percentage, which was the highest of his career. He got better every single year he played. I think that's really important, and a lot of people don't love this pick. They think he's, the Saints are doing this to try to push out Derek Carr or whatever. I think letting him sit and learning for a couple of years, there's nothing wrong with taking a quarterback in the 5th round when you haven't invested in that position heavily over the past 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, he fell so far in the draft because of how hectic the first round was at the quarterback position. People were saying it whenever we turned in his name that, hey, a lot of people cooled off on quarterback. We probably could have seen Spencer Rattler go in the 3rd or 4th round. But Spencer Rattler was really a Heisman candidate to begin the year. Offensive line fell off once SEC play started, and so I'm excited to see him in preseason or in the future as a Saint, just to see what that arm can do when protected well.
Yeah, he was regarded as a pretty talented player coming into college for a reason. He's got the talent. I think he just, didn't find the right spot in Oklahoma and then started to mold into himself at South Carolina. I really don't mind this pick, especially considering, our current backup quarterback situation. I think it's a great pick to add some depth and like a safety valve almost at that position.
Yeah, I think the floor is so much higher, and not only the floor, but the ceiling is so much higher for Spencer Rattler than it is for a guy like Jake Haener, Nathan Peterman, and I think even Kellen Mond's on the roster right now. So the fact that you can get a guy who has probably a higher floor and higher ceiling to step in, learn, a guy who has 4 years starting experience in college football in 2 elite conferences on 2 really good programs, I think I don't see how this can be a bad pick for the Saints. I know, people are saying, oh, you wasted a pick on a quarterback. It's never wasting a pick, especially if he can sit there, learn, and develop into something that can win you 2 to 3 games and then maybe evolve to a starter.
Yeah, and you invested a 4th-round pick in Haener last year. Yeah, you took Spencer Rattler in the 5th this year. But it's hard to look at the numbers there because of how poorly Haener looked in the preseason and the small amount of snaps that he got during the regular season. And so I think that it was a position of need that really needed to be addressed, the backup quarterback.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did it with a guy as highly touted as Spencer Rattler. Seventh quarterback off the board, even though there was over 100 picks in between quarterback 6 and quarterback 7. Pick number 170. One of the best names in the draft to pair with Kool-Aid McKinstry, Bub Means. Great name. And a pretty good player, too. He showed out at the combine, ran sub 4.5, which is very impressive for somebody like him. He's 6'2", 220, physical and mental toughness. And my favorite quote that I saw from Bub Means, after the draft, they asked him, what role do you want to play on the team? What do you think you bring to the table? And he said, if you don't block, you don't get the rock. So he obviously is somebody who's going to play his position the way it should be played, and that's doing whatever you need to do to win. In a Clint Kubiak offense, that's a branch off of Kyle Shanahan, where the 49ers love to have their receivers blocking downfield. If he really has not only the ability to block, but the mentality to block, that's going to be really big on getting him on the field early.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, we've seen some of these receivers kind of have, that big head, that ego, to where they're too good to block. And it definitely rubs fans the wrong way. So I'm glad to see that, he's noticed it and he doesn't want his name to be used like that. And also the fact that, he realizes it's a team sport. Wins come first.
Right.
Stats come second. And I'm really glad that, he put that out there.
Yeah, and wide receiver had to be addressed in this draft. We kept saying that it had to be addressed in the second round. That didn't happen this weekend. But with names like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed solidified as the top 2 receivers for the Saints, the third and fourth receivers position is a battle right now, not including Bub Means with A.T. Perry, with A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson Jr., and Equanimeous St. Brown. We saw some great flashes out of A.T. Perry this past season. Does he continue to get better? Most likely, but you always need a wide receiver 4 no matter what happens.
Yeah, Mustang does love AT.
I do. Another guy I do like is Equanimeous St. Brown. We've definitely seen flashes of him in Chicago to where he's been like, okay, he's got some skill. So I could definitely see him, making some moves, impressing some people, and moving up that depth part pretty fast.
Yeah, and his brother is the highest paid receiver in the league now for the Detroit Lions. So he has football in his blood. I think it's going to be a good little wide receiver battle in camp. It's always fun to watch training camp from who's going to make the final 53, who's going to secure that 5th or 6th wide receiver spot. Same thing with pretty much any skill position, like 3rd running back, 5th corner, stuff like that. I think Bub Means definitely has the potential to make the final 53, and even if not, he'll be our first guy on the practice squad. I think he's definitely got some potential, and hope we see him on Sundays. Rebo Hustle, I'm going to let you take this one.
My favorite gem of this draft, pick 175, Jalen Ford, a massive linebacker, 6'3". Yes. But rare size for the linebacker position these days. A guy that, in a league that only Roquan Smith is a massive linebacker that can get sideline to sideline, seeing a guy like Jalen Ford being able to get creative in the pass game, where he's not necessarily a speed threat like a Devin White, but just being able to read the quarterback's eyes, and with that size, he's such a great run stopper. And I didn't even know this until today. He had 4 forced fumbles and 6 picks. Guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, one of my favorite, player types in the NFL is that classic middle linebacker role. Those big guys who, while they are huge and can stop the run, fill those gaps, can also get sideline to sideline. So you saying that really
He's creative. It's not necessarily a flash of speed, but he knows exactly where the quarterback's putting that ball.
Rebo Hustle made the comparison earlier to Devin White. Not saying he is Devin White, but saying he has some of those similar qualities where he can play sideline to sideline. He creates turnovers at that linebacker position, and he has just this unending motor to him. I know there's a lot of things Devin White has done to the Saints that have made him not super popular around here anymore.
But he's a Tiger.
He's a Tiger. Yeah,
He is a
let's
Tiger
say
at
he's
heart.
like Devin White at LSU.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and he's bigger. I mean, he's 6'3", 240, I think is the size. So, like Rebo said, he doesn't fit necessarily the prototypical size of a current linebacker in the NFL. But when you have that size and you can also run downhill and stop the run at the line of scrimmage while dropping back, getting 6 picks over your career, and they weren't like 6 interceptions that just so happened to fall into his hands. Like, he was reading the eyes of the quarterback, followed the pass, made an impressive catch. So he wasn't somebody I was super familiar with before the draft process, but since Rebo Hustle has been talking him up, I've been looking at him, and he has the opportunity to take DeMario's spot once DeMario's gone and fill in that role very, very well.
Yeah, I knew he was like this amazing run stopper just watching the college football playoff last year. But since we've drafted him, I got a little bit deeper into his film, and I sent Redfish some videos last night, and it's just incredible how well he can read the quarterback on pass plays.
Yeah, I know we've touched on it before about those defensive captains, those foundations we have getting close to the end of their career. DeMario Davis being one. I'm glad to see that we might have found a diamond in the rough being DeMario's replacement this late in the draft.
Absolutely. Moving on to our second to last pick here, pick 199, Christian Boyd. Don't love the college he came out of just because of us being burnt by him a couple of years ago with Trevor Penning. But it's a rotational piece to the interior. Of course, a pick this late's never guaranteed to make the 53. But Malcolm Roach is gone from the team. That's 22 to 24 snaps per game that you're missing there. Of course, you can make those up with Brzee and Shepard and Saunders, but you're going to need to find somebody who can kind of come in and just be, that 10 to 12 snap a game type of dude, stop the run on third downs if it's a third and short. Just a smart football player who has a high motor, and that's what you're looking at with Christian Boyd.
Yeah, day 3, I saw his name get announced, and I was like, who is this guy? I know once you get to around the 200 or later range, you're kind of just swinging on upside. You're not necessarily swinging for a guy that is definitely going to make your roster. But so I watched some film on him, and it just seemed like he wasn't very creative in his pass rush, but it was relentless. If the quarterback got out of the pocket, he was always the first guy there. He doesn't quit. He doesn't know how to quit, and that's exciting to see out of a guy that is just so raw.
You can teach technique, you can teach skill, but you can't teach motor. You can't teach energy. You can't teach the willingness to fight and the willingness to get to the quarterback or the running back in the backfield. So I like that he has the intangibles that you can build upon once he gets into the pro locker room.
Yeah. Like y'all said, he's got heart, which makes me, really happy for his upside of being that rotational piece on the defensive line. If someone needs a break, having him come in won't be the end of the world.
Because you absolutely need a fourth guy. Like, we have the 3 that are listed there, Brzee, Shepard, and Saunders, but there's not a solidified fourth guy. So I think out of the 2 guys that we ended this draft with, Christian Boyd has a high likelihood of making this roster.
And it always feels good, and we'll talk about it with the last guy as well. It always feels good when you go through a draft class and you're like, all these guys are going to make the 53, or at least most of them will, and that's kind of how we feel right now. Is that all of these guys are not necessarily locks, but high contenders to make our final roster. So when you have a full draft class of that, you come home happy. And our last guy, definitely the biggest swing of the draft, and you kind of have to be that way when you're 20 picks from the end, Josiah Ezerim. Raw athlete with ideal size. Very, very athletic player, played D-tackle for his first year of college. This is only his second year playing on the O-line, so he definitely needs to learn some technique, learns how to move his hands with his feet, and teaching himself rather than to explode laterally off the ball, maybe exploding vertically, however you want to explain it from the O-line perspective. That's our O-line guy right there, not me. But yeah, super athletic guy, can move, has all the tools. When you pair it with his 6'6", I think he's 340, 320. So he's got the size. We'll see if he makes the 53 man, but definitely the biggest swing in this draft.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he can do in training camp or rookie mini camp, whatever stage he gets to. Just off of a pure offensive line technique, he's got a lot of things to clean up, but you've got a raw athlete, a guy that has a high motor. You've never seen him just quit on a play. We watched a little bit of film earlier just to get familiar with him. So, yeah, I'm not expecting him to be a starter in the next 2 years, 3 years. Maybe he'll be a rotational piece for us in the future. But his eyes need to be solely set on competing for this 53-man roster.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. I've never heard of this guy. But from the way y'all are talking about him, I have faith. I think, like you said, coming to the future, he could be a rotational piece. But, more importantly, like, if he's willing to put in the work and has the heart, has the grind, the Saints will find a way to use him.
Yeah, and, he made third-team All-American this past season in college football while only playing the position 2 years. So, obviously, he's got some room to grow, but he's doing good work. And if you look at the depth of position there, it's not like we have, solidified starters. We have 4 guys now, adding Fuaga, that are pretty much solidified for that starting lineup. If Ramczyk is healthy. If not, we have another spot open. But you look at Trevor Penning, you look at Nick Saldiveri, who was a late-round pick last year, Landon Young, late-round pick 2 years ago, Oli Udoh, who we gave a small contract to in the offseason. So it's not like this is a set battle where he's battling for one spot. If he can really show up and show out, he has a chance to solidify himself on this roster. So I think that pretty much wraps up our Saints draft. Overall, I'd say I'd give our draft an A minus. I think, obviously, taking the upswing on these last 2 picks, we don't have necessarily the highest floor in these guys, but when you're picking in the 6th and 7th round and you're a team that has a lot of older veterans, you want to get those young talents who can learn and have the tools in the toolbox, but not necessarily have the technique and veteran presence that they need. Moving on from the Saints, let's go NFL wide. We kind of put our heads together, pick 3 winners, 3 losers. For us, the winners were a lot easier than the losers because we did a lot of work on this draft. I would argue it's the most work we've ever done on any draft. So we were more familiar with players. So we see names, and seeing them with certain teams, we're like, man, that's not terrible. That's not terrible. That's not terrible. I think everybody in this draft ranges from an A+ to a C-. I don't think anybody necessarily goes lower than that because there were redeeming qualities in any class. But let's cover the bad first, and then we'll get to the good, because we've been talking up the Saints so much. First class we're going to talk about is the one where we're glad they had a bad draft in our eyes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
I'm glad all these teams have
it's our least favorite team in the Off the Dome studio, and that's the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, questionable pick in the first round without a doubt in Michael Penix. You have any defensive player on the board that you want, and you're struggling on the defense. You have Rome Odunze at wide receiver there for your picking. Pair him with Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson with Kirk Cousins throwing the ball. Man, that sounds like an offense. And you go out and you pick a backup quarterback at number 8 who probably wouldn't have went until 13 at the earliest.
Yeah, I don't love the swing at 8, and especially after hearing the defense of it, of, hey, we're going to be great with Kirk Cousins. We'll never be in this position again, so we need to take a quarterback now. Which, who does that? That's never been a thing of, hey, we have 4 years of this guy left. We need to go get a quarterback now just because we're not going to get there. Some people say, hey, we're going to be good for 4 years, and then that next year will be bad, and we'll be able to get a quarterback.
Yeah, for me, the defense of it was really strange, too. Former Saints assistant GM Terry Fontenot is the GM over in Atlanta, and he used the Jordan Love perspective of, hey, they went up, they got their guy to sit for a few years, and look how that's working out. Very different situation.
Packers were a playoff team.
The Packers were, first of all, yes, they were a playoff team. They were coming off an NFC Championship game. They had one of the best quarterbacks of all time who was nearing the end of his career, whereas the Falcons are a team who just paid $90 million to a brand-new quarterback who's never played in their system before. invested a lot into that quarterback, invested a lot into the offense, and kind of left the defense high and dry, and yet they go with a quarterback who's not guaranteed to play in the next 4 seasons.
Yeah, I really just didn't understand it. I kind of had to double take as I was watching the draft to make sure that I heard.
You saw that right?
Yeah, I heard Pat McAfee say it correctly. Still kind of puzzles me, especially with the amount of defensive talent they had and how they would have upgraded at damn near every position if they picked any of the defensive players there.
Yep.
Or even if you did want to go offense, like you said, Romo Dunze was there to put him opposite of Drake London, to have 2 very different receivers with a veteran quarterback at the helm. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, and
I don't even need to see. Like, I know the rest of their draft didn't go, like, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't.
There's one bright spot I want to touch on, but
yeah, and we're gonna go quicker through the rest of the teams. We just want to talk as much bad about the Falcons as we can.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was saying, I know that the rest of their draft wasn't terrible. Like you said, they had a bright spot or 2, but this first, top 10 pick, and you do this, ruins your draft for me.
Yeah, very questionable decision. Looking at the rest of their draft, 2nd round, they move up to grab Rook Ororo. Another interesting pick there, a guy who maybe would have been available later, and they had, in my opinion, better players on the board, and somebody we'll talk about when we get to the Commanders.
For real steal in the 3rd round with Braylon Trice.
Braylon Trice, I think, is going to be the best player out of their class. He was a guy who was a really good player on a Washington defense that, made it to the national championship. It's not like their defense was their bright spot in Washington. That really came with a guy we just talked about in Michael Penix. But Braylon Trice was the best player on that defense, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And he has size. He has mobility. He has everything you look for in an edge rusher, and they need one bad. So Braylon Trice may step in and be a really good player. They also got Brandon Dorlus, who's a project defensive tackle, a guy who could either end up out of the league in a year or end up being a darn good player. So we'll see how Brandon Dorlus does. One of those highly athletic defensive tackles that you take a bet on. And then pick a running back, Jace McClellan out of Alabama. Not an Alabama running back like you've seen with guys like Najee Harris and Derrick Henry and Mark Ingram. Just kind of a depth piece there. And then ended on 2 players who I've never heard of. So, Falcons, our biggest loser. Moving on to the Patriots, another team who, could have done better, in my opinion. I'm not the biggest Drake May fan. They take him at 3. It makes sense in this draft to take Drake May. I'm not saying they made the wrong pick. I'm just not a huge fan. I think he has way more to improve on than he has going for him. His biggest, pluses are size and athleticism, which are great. People compare him to Josh Allen in that way, but I saw way more flashes out of Josh Allen than I did out of Drake May. He doesn't make good decisions. His footwork is terrible. His mechanics seem off for somebody who's been an experienced quarterback with a lot of athletes in his family. And then you add in the rest of their draft. I
kind of think they fumbled the 2nd round because we saw a lot of wide receivers go at the beginning of the 2nd round. Patriots decided that they should trade back 2 spots, miss out on 2 more receivers, and ended up having to settle for Jalen Polk, who's a great receiver in his own right, but he was definitely the number 2 receiver for Washington. And it's hard to sit there and be like, yes, I got the number 2 receiver on this one team as my 2nd round pick. Whenever there's guys that were really dominant.
Yeah, I mean, you still had Troy Franklin, Tez Walker, A.D. Mitchell on the board, and Jalen Polk goes above him. Not the best pick in my opinion. I think the other wide receiver they took, Javon Baker out of UCF, has a chance to be even better than Polk was. So if I were to look at a bright spot in their draft, that's where I would go. But just looking at their class as a whole, not much impressed me.
Yeah, kind of like you said about Drake May. Do I think the pick was bad? No. I think you took a position of need and the best player, in that spot. Like, that was the pick, made the right pick. It's really just a player.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm not sitting here saying they should have picked somebody else. It's just the way the board fell, and I'm not a big Drake May fan. If I was a big Drake May fan, they may be a draft winner, but I'm not.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. It's definitely an upgrade.
No. Yeah. I mean.
Oh, yeah. We've done talked about Jacoby
We-
Brissett so many times in front of
We
this
don't
camera.
even have to mention that. Last thing to talk about the Patriots, they also took Joe Milton, a great athlete with a huge arm, but a project to say the least at the quarterback position. So we'll see what they do with two rookie quarterbacks on the same roster. And then Jaheim Bell, a guy who was fantastic at South Carolina and then kind of got lost in the fold at Florida State. Last draft class, and we can spend literally 3 seconds on this one. The Cleveland Browns
Had no first-round pick.
no first-round pick. First pick came at 54. It was Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State, who is
He's got size.
he'll be a solid defensive tackle. I don't think he'll be anything spectacular where we're talking about him for years on end. He'll be one of those guys who stays in the league 7-8 years and does what he needs to do to stay on a roster. And then everybody else, I'm just kind of like,
Well, they got Zach
Man.
Zenner in the third. And I think he can be like a Nick Saldiveri, like a swing guard tackle, just a good plug-and-play kind of guy. I don't know if he's going to break the starting lineup or anything like that.
he's your first guy off the bench probably if somebody gets hurt or somebody needs a break or whatever. But just overall, very middle of the road, don't care about it, Browns draft here.
Very Cleveland thing to do. However, for the player, I do think he ended up in the right spot because going on the same defensive line as Myles Garrett, you're going to get some opportunity because he's going to be double teamed every play.
They didn't get any Vontae Mack or Ray Jennings in this draft.
Nope.
But moving on to the winners, for me, the biggest winner. I wouldn't say the
tough.
biggest winner.
It's tough.
But these three were all right there at the top of the class. We'll start with the team on top, and that's the Eagles. I know Reese has his own opinion about this draft. I loved that they got what was viewed as, cornerback 1A, 1B, however you want to put it with Terrion Arnold, and they get him at 22, first corner off the board. Quinyon Mitchell. I think that was a great pick. They get Cooper DeJean in the second, who we had him going to the Eagles in the first.
Yeah.
So we got the place right, but not necessarily the pick.
It
And then
really
you-
surprised me how far he fell.
Yeah. He should not have been there at 40. One pick before the Saints ended up moving up. And then you look down the list. They get Will Shipley, who I think is a great running back out of Clemson. Got overlooked a lot because he was hurt. Didn't get to work out a lot in the offseason, but I think he's going to be a really good player. He'll be a great change of pace back. And he does a lot of the same things that Saquon does, so I think he'll be great to sit behind Saquon and learn. Jalix Hunt, edge rusher out of Houston Christian. Project piece, but we know the Eagles are really good with those small school edge rushers. Like, it just happens with them. And then they get Jeremiah Trotter, Trevor Keegan, Johnny Wilson. 3 really good players from really good
In the
programs.
5th and 6th round, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Trotter going late like that really surprised me too.
Yeah,
I had him higher.
He goes to the team his dad played for, and putting Trotter with Nakobe Dean is a great linebacker situation because they're so opposite players that they can do, like, they will cover each other's weaknesses and enhance each other's strengths. So I'm really excited about what the Eagles did for what was a subpar defense last season. Moving on to our second team, I would argue this might be my favorite draft of the weekend, and that's the Washington Commanders. I'm going to run down the draft before we talk about the picks just because they got so much talent. Jaden Daniels at 2, Jerzon Newton at 36, Mike Sanderstrill, DB out of Michigan, Ben Sinnott, who is widely viewed as the tight end 2 at pick 53, Brandon Coleman, a tackle out of TCU. They get Luke McCaffrey, brother of Christian McCaffrey, in the 4th round, and then ended it with Jordan McGee, Dominique Hampton, and Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Well, I don't know Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I knew every other name on that draft, which is saying a lot when you have 257 guys who get drafted every year. We love JD5 in this household. I think he'll be great. Jerzon Newton was one of the biggest steals, in my opinion. I think he should have went in the top 20 picks, and he goes at 36. Ruka Kororo, the guy we talked about with the Falcons, went before him, which was absurd to me. Mike Sanderstill is the definition of a leader slot corner on that defense. And then you add the big white hope in Luke McCaffrey.
This is going to make or break it for me, but is Jonathan Allen still a Commander?
He is. Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne still in the middle of the defense, and they add Jerzon Newton.
Yeah, they won the draft.
I kind of feel like Jerzon Newton can even, like, we talked about the Commanders kind of needing edge presence, being they traded away
both their edge.
Both of their edge. I feel like Drazon Newton's got a good enough pass rush game, and he's not necessarily one of those big D tackles. I think he can play edge in the league.
I agree. I think he could slide.
Yeah, and the best part about that is he's moving into a Dan Quinn defense. And if you know anything about a Dan Quinn defense, he is going to play big and fast and strong on the defensive line. You saw it in Atlanta, you saw it in Dallas, and now you're going to see it again in Washington.
Yeah. But with that being said, to me, this Washington draft is the winner because it feels like every pick they made, even down to the last bit, had a purpose. Like they weren't just, hoping to find a diamond in the rough at a position they might need in the future. Every pick to me was someone that they could use at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they drafted for need, and they drafted the best player at that need at every position. So it's like, what bad can you say about that? And it was one of those teams that, a lot of people like to do draft grades. A lot of different websites and analytics like to say, oh, this was a B+, but somebody else has it as a C or whatever. Commanders were widely viewed as an A- or higher around every single website, every single blog, everything. Everybody knows the Commanders had a good draft. And usually when people agree on something like that, it ends up working out. You saw it with the Jets a couple of years ago when they get Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. You saw it with the Lions last season getting Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch. And it works out again. I think the Commanders. But he wasn't too good. But yeah, I think the Commanders nailed it.
With this draft and with the moves the Commanders have made this offseason, I'm gonna say it now. They will be in the playoffs. They might not, be one of the top seeds, but they will absolutely make a wild card spot. They were already, kind of competing for it last year, not, in the win-loss column, but if you look at each game, they were close.
Yeah.
No matter who they were playing. They beat the Eagles.
True. And we can do that on our NFL Hot Takes episode because we always do one of those. And we'll probably get into one of those pretty soon, considering we're going to get into the dog days of summer here that we'll have to make some content popping.
Some moves.
Baseball season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, dog days of summer. And then another really good draft. And for me, after the first two picks, you could have done whatever, and you nailed this draft. Jared Verse at 19, who Rebo Hustle and I have quoted as one of the best edge prospects in the past few years. I went as far as to say he could be as good as Myles Garrett. And then you get the combine winner, number one combine winner, Braden Fisk, in the second round. College teammates on an undefeated Florida State team who showed up and showed out in every single game that they played. High football IQ, high motor, and really talented players. And then you add to that, they get Blake Corum in the third to sit behind Kyron Williams. Cam Kinchins, who's one of the better safeties out of this draft in kind of a light class. I mean, it's hard to look at the Rams draft and not fall in love with what they did.
And it's such a Rams draft. Like, they didn't address team need. They went and got the players that they had faith in. And that's one thing I love about draft season when it comes to the Los Angeles Rams is they know who their dogs are, and they're getting them.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of treat it like a fantasy football draft, and I like it.
Yeah, if you ask me before the draft, what's the Rams' three biggest needs? It's corner. Interior D-line, corner, and off-ball linebacker.
They draft no corner.
They took 0 corners. They took 0 off-ball linebackers. And, yes, they did address the interior D-line, so that one will check off. They got Braden Fisk and Tyler Davis, two very different players that'll both help that defense. But they went out and they got guys who they thought were going to help their team. And kind of similar to how I was talking about the 49ers with these guys before the draft started, no matter how you feel about those players, it always works out for them. The Rams get homegrown talent, and it ends up working out. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, their O-line was fantastic for years. Aaron Donald, I mean, it just works out for the Rams. So, they got their guys. They were happy in their beach house in Los Angeles, and I think they'll show up and show out this year. We're going to move on to the NFL draft, but in a different way, talking about the college, and that's our favorite team, the LSU Tigers. We'll quickly cover each player, where they went, why we like it, why we don't. Pick 2, Jaden Daniels to Washington. Chalk pick. Everybody knew he was going there. He is going to turn the Commanders into a very fun team to watch.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Pick six. Malik Neighbors to the New York Giants. Another kind of chalk pick. They have been missing a playmaker forever. I mean, pretty much since Odell left. And they replace that playmaker with another LSU wide receiver and somebody who may even have a higher ceiling than Odell did. Malik Neighbors going to pick six, Giants.
Made history. First ever wide receiver quarterback combo to be taken in the top 10 picks of an NFL draft.
Wow. And
Look at us.
I'll tell you what. They're both going to be really good NFL players.
Yeah. Just to touch on this Giants pick for Neighbors, for the longest time, it felt like their receiving core was just so lackluster. Like, they're going to throw three guys out there, and you might have heard of one. And usually it was Sterling Shepard for 15, 20 years.
Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, like, always those same guys. And it felt like they've been there for, like you said, 15, 20 years, but now they have a star.
Yeah.
The next three picks all go to Jacksonville, surprisingly. Brian Thomas Jr., Mason Smith, Jordan Jefferson, reuniting with worst defensive coordinator in LSU history, Matt House. So interesting to see that Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson end up with a coach who didn't end up working out in Baton Rouge. But Brian Thomas Jr., they released Zay Jones today in Jacksonville, so that tells you what they think about BT, taking him in the first round after moving back and then releasing the guy who kind of filled in that number 2 slot last year when Calvin Ridley disappeared off the face of the earth. So Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr., Gabe Davis. Brian Thomas has a chance to be that number 1 target for Trevor Lawrence, and I think he's going to be a really good player in the offense that they run down in Jacksonville.
Yeah, if I didn't love Brian Thomas so much, I may have considered Jacksonville for one of the worst drafts as a whole, just because we all chalked them as a cornerback pick in the first round, and they kind of swung on upside on Mason Smith, which by all means the guy's a freak, but it's still a little weird that Jacksonville was like, yeah, we need LSU Tigers.
Yeah, got 3 of them.
Got to have them.
Brian Thomas, I love. Mason Smith, not the biggest fan of Mason Smith. Like Rebo said, he is an absolute athletic freak. I mean, he's huge, and he's got power. He's got speed. He's got what you want as far as build goes. But, I mean, character-wise, I'm just not in love with Mason Smith. Jordan Jefferson, I think, is kind of like we said with Christian Boyd, rotational run stopper. I think he can really fill that role. It's what he did for the Tigers, and I think it'll translate to the NFL because you can do whatever you want, but if a guy comes in and he's ready to play, which Jordan Jefferson was, transferring over to LSU, that'll translate into the NFL as well. And then the final pick for LSU in this draft was Mekhi Wingo, a guy who I think slid because of the injury he had. If it wasn't for getting injured and missing the last 6 games of last season, I think Mekhi Wingo goes a whole lot higher in this draft. I would venture to say he goes up there with Mason Smith in that 2nd to 3rd round range because he was our number 18, which if you know anything about LSU, you know that means a lot to the program. And not only was he leader off the field and in the locker room, but he was a really good player on the field as well. Little undersized, but, I mean, he had heart and he played every single snap. So glad to see him end up with my Detroit Lions.
I will say, with all these Tigers getting drafted, be on the lookout for undrafted free agent Omar Spates.
Before you move on, it really hurts to see Mekhi Wingo go so late, and he's going to have to fight for his roster spot in Detroit when LSU right now is searching vicariously through the transfer portal for a defensive tackle because they lost these 3 guys. And just knowing how much of a monster he is and how much production he would have had this season in a Tigers uniform. But good for him for getting drafted. I'm sure he'll fight his way into being a Detroit Lion. Yeah, Detroit needed interior D-line. That was one of their biggest needs going into the draft, and snagging Mekhi Wingo, I think it's a guy Dan Campbell's going to absolutely love. So I'm expecting him to make the 53, if you ask me. Moving on from football and the NFL draft, last thing we're going to cover on this episode of Off the Dome Sports Podcast,
the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, we are Pels fans in this household, and we're going to kind of give a recap of the season. Unfortunately, Rebo Hustle and I were in the building last night to see the final game of this team and what we expect to be the final game with some of these guys on the roster. The New Orleans Pelicans, the Skeletons, as they were known this season, regular season go 49-33, one game away from the 50-win mark, but yet that only got us to the play-in tournament. We went 1-1, but the last game's the one you need to win. They secure the 8 seed, but that wasn't even enough to get one win as we get swept by the number 1 seed, Oklahoma City Thunder.
Yeah, I mean, it really sucks looking at the Eastern and the Western Conference, knowing how good the Western Conference is. And we talked about this in the car on the way back from the game last night. Is it possible for the NBA to ever turn to just a 16-seed playoffs? Is it possible that the number 8 seed Pelicans has the same record as the 3 seed Knicks? It really hurts knowing that that's the case. But that is how basketball is played. You play in your conference. You get swept by the 1 seed Thunder, who played immaculate defense this series. They found a way to disrupt the New Orleans offense as much as possible, causing turnovers, just getting guys out of rhythm. Lou Dort played like an absolute unit, was the real linebacker of that defense. I mean, he locked up B.I. I don't think B.I. had more than 15 points in any game this series. So that leads into the questions for the offseason. Are we trading B.I.? Do we keep him? Do you think that they need more time, which by David Griffin's interviews today, after exit meetings and everything, it seems like a lot of things are going to change in this lineup.
Yeah, David Griffin said, every offseason we said give it more time, give it more health, and we got it this year and we saw what happened, so something has to change, which is big words from David Griffin considering he's always been somebody who has kind of resisted change and just wanted to stick with his guys, and we've given it time. We've given it 3 years with our big three, and it just hasn't worked out. So like you said, what do we do with Brandon Ingram? I love Brandon Ingram as a player. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the league because when he's on, there's no stopping him. I mean, you can put 6 hands in his face, and he's going to make that midi over you. He is that good. But the problem is his fit into the offense, and, you really have to pay attention to those kinds of things, especially when you consider C.J. McCollum, Zion Williamson, Herb, Trey off the bench. I mean, you really have to find your spot on this team, and we don't know where Brandon Ingram lies. I mean, this is the offseason to make that decision. Either you trade him before the season or you give him an extension. There's no in-between.
Yeah, and of course there's the big question at center. Jonas' contract is up, so you're kind of just dead in the water seeing how much money he's getting offered because you can't really offer him that much. You're kind of crossing your fingers. If Jonas is the guy you want, you're kind of crossing your fingers and sitting there thinking about hopefully nobody offers him a big bag and we can get him on a steal price.
At the center position, it's hard to imagine this team without JV. He's been so darn good for us. He has played. If there's anybody who's been consistent and anybody who we could count on night in and night out, it's Jonas Valanciunas. I mean, I think over his 2 seasons here, he missed maybe 8 games. Like, he was a consistent piece of this, not only offense, but he really improved on the defensive side, going from somebody who would just kind of sit at the rim to being somebody who could be valued as a rim protector. So, obviously, I think big props to JV for what he did in New Orleans, and that's going to get overlooked from a lot of people, but it shouldn't, because I think he was one of the most mainstay parts of getting us to where we've been. And those 2 questions combined really get us to how many players do we retain from this squad. I know another contributor at the No Network, which, of course, we want you to check out everything they do over there. Pels Press, a fantastic Pelicans reporter. He does a podcast. He does write-ups. He's really active on X, so make sure to give him a follow at the Pels Press. He put the over-under line at 5.5 of the players that leave this team from who we have this season. So, do we retain most of the team, or do we get rid of more than 5 players that we have currently on the roster? That's kind of where he set it at, and I think that's a good number because you look at guys like BI, CJ, JV could all get moved, and then, if you're really making trades, you're going to have to throw in guys like Larry or Dyson or, even consider Jose. So there's definitely a lot of players in this team who we could see get moved this offseason, and that all starts at the top with our big three.
I mean, as the record shows, this is one of the most successful Pelicans teams we've seen, yet they still couldn't get it done in the postseason. And it sucks because this wasn't a postseason that most fans are going into saying, "Oh, we have a chance." A lot of people felt like we didn't belong there, especially after the second game against the Thunder. First game could have went either way. And it was a big momentum loss whenever we didn't come out on top, and I think that affected the rest of that series. But as far as players we might see leave or return, I could definitely see us, losing Jonas, losing CJ, and mainly losing Zion. I think that the time is up with him. We've seen him be a huge, health risk to start his career coming into this season where he was, for the most part, very healthy. But to me, it comes down to his size and, all of his ability with the team. And he really didn't seem to fit and mold to me like some of the other players on this team has. I know watching him play, it's like he defies the laws of physics. He just runs as fast as he can at the hoop, throws it up, and it magically goes in. But I think that we could get a nice package in return for him. That's why I see us moving him.
Yeah,
Well,
I politely disagree.
I was about to say, as the logo shows on the left-hand side, we do promise hot takes. And if there ever was a hot take about this Pelicans team, I think it was just stated by our friendly Mustang.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. That's definitely the highest value trade asset that you have. But I really feel like David Griffin's coded speeches lately have leaned towards his love for Zion. We saw the most healthy season out of him so far. He played 65 games. Unfortunately, pulled his hamstring against the Lakers in the play-in. But he was by far the best player on this team, was the leader of the offense. And just the gravity that Zion applies to the offense opens up so many doors for everybody else, and that's what was lacking in this Thunder series. And I really feel like one of CJ or BI, probably BI just because of his value. He's young, longer guy, plays better defense. One of those two guys, just because they're both ISO ball handlers, they're both midi to three-pointer occasionally kind of guy. I feel like one of those guys has to go.
Yeah, and while this was CJ's best season he's had in a Pelicans uniform, without a doubt, not only from a scoring perspective, but a efficiency and leadership perspective, I think this was his best season. For me, that would be the guy we move just because I think he fits the team the least. For me, I think what we really need on this Pelicans team is a true facilitating point guard. We don't need a guy who's going to go out there and get you 19, 20 points a game. If you can get us 12, but facilitate an offense and get us moving and really pass the ball around to have an offense that flows rather than a three-man game with two in the corner or an ISO for 14 seconds and then trying to dip, which we've seen a lot of out of the Pelicans. I think that's the move for me. I love Brandon Ingram and don't want to say anything about trading him because I think he's a really good player, and when he's on, he's on. I think him and Zion can definitely coexist. It's just about communication is what BI said today, and I think that's true. If those two can communicate and figure out each other's styles and learn to work together, I think if we have a true facilitating point guard and, match that with maybe a stretch big who can also defend the rim, I think the Pelicans can make some moves to, really become a contender in the West. Getting near 50 wins and getting at the 8 seed, I think speaks less to this team, speaks more to the competitiveness and the parity of the NBA at the moment. So I think it's, for us, it's about what's going to make us better and what's going to push us in not only to the second round of the playoffs, but the conference finals and eventually become a contender for an NBA title.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the top 5 best regular season records from this franchise, period. And unfortunately, just because of how good the West was this year, we got stuck in a play-in situation. Lost the first game, therefore, after winning the second game, became the 8 seed. But again, back to David Griffin's coded messages. A lot of things are going to change this offseason. At least one or two of your starters are going to move. And Najee Marshall's in a contract year. Don't really necessarily have the money tied to give to him just because it's all tied up in Zion Supermax and BI Supermax, and CJ's making more money than both of them.
Yeah, with this Pels team, it's not a question of if, but when something changes. I think that's going to do it this episode of Off the Dome Sports Podcast. We got to cover all three of our favorite teams, Saints, LSU, and Pels. If you enjoy Louisiana sports content, make sure to give us a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go back and watch our old videos. We know you'll enjoy that content too. We really enjoyed the mock draft, so if you want to go back, see what we got right, what we got wrong, go ahead and check out those videos as well. And like I said earlier, make sure to follow us on the X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, _Dome Pod. That's where we post, when videos are coming out. We'll retweet all content we find valuable to the Off the Dome community, as well as the No Network, KNE, AUX. You see it there in the bottom left. A great network we are blessed to be able to work with, and a great group of guys who puts out great content, not only about Louisiana sports, but national sports that you're going to love as well. So we want to thank you for watching. I am Redfish.
I'm Rebo Hustle.
And I'm Mustang.
And we will see you next time.